Welcome to AskPsychSessions with Marianne Lloyd, where we ask some of the best teachers we know questions from you, our audience. If you have a question or an idea for a conversation, please visit bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. That's bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. All one word, all lowercase. And here's our next question.
Thank you for joining us today. Our guest is Jessica Hill. Jessica is coming to us from Utah Valley University. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So I got in touch with you, I'll be honest with the listeners, originally because I saw you had done some faculty development work, and I thought that might be nice to hear about. But when we were just kind of talking generally before we set up this recording today, you actually had some, I thought, really helpful ideas for right now when our students are under even more stress than usual, for how to make sure that our classrooms stay as equitable as possible. So would you mind telling the listeners a little bit about your approach right now?
Sure. I call it the circle of safety. I'm sure somewhere else there's a better name for it, or, it's not the newest idea under the sun. And I call it the circle of safety after Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith, because they had an interview online where they were talking about how their kids, they encourage them to be honest and open about their experiences. And they all get in a circle together and they go around the circle and they say a swear word to prove that they are in the circle of safety. And then the kids can say anything. And if they say it up front, then they don't get in trouble. So for example, they could say, I'm going to go smoke marijuana or something. And if they say it in the circle of safety, no trouble. But if the parents find it out after the fact, they get in trouble. So I thought I would adapt that with the tell me up front part and not the in trouble part with my students this semester to try to help them cope with some of the stress and uncertainty surrounding COVID-19, our social political unrest, the election. And I've offered them compassion in a way that I haven't before.
And so what does that look like? Like you're giving a couple hours extra to do an assignment, or is this level of compassion bigger? Oh,
it's bigger than that. It's pretty radical for me. I think that I was in a compassionate place before, but this goes well beyond. So traditionally, I would say, there's a late work period. You could turn it in for a point deduction. If something big is going on, contact me. But I just abandoned all that. I just said, I am not even going to ask you what your situation is. I'm not going to interrogate you about what's going on. I'm not going to require documentation from you. So this is a big shift for me. But the idea is that, sometimes people can't afford healthcare. And here I am saying, give me your doctor's note. And that's not equitable. Or perhaps they have a situation that they find, uncomfortable or embarrassing. Maybe they're homeless and, they couldn't find internet that night and they couldn't take the test. And so maybe they just want to tell me, can I have another 24 hours? That's great. I push back on some students because they don't think they need the circle of safety. For example, some students have family members with health issues. I've had a couple students going to sit with people at the hospital all night, or that their relatives are going through cancer treatment. And they're like, no, I can handle all these things. And I said, you know what? That's nice that you think you can. And that's great that you want to, but I'd like to give you some space to handle that thing. And so sometimes it takes some convincing because it's very free. I say to them, tell me what deadline would work for you. And they're like, what about tomorrow? I'm like, are you sure? Is tomorrow okay? And they're like, no, not really. Okay, well, what would work? And to have that freedom to say this would work for me has been somewhat uncomfortable for them. They're not used to someone accommodating them in their education. They're used to coming and begging for accommodations, or not receiving them even though they're worthy of them because of the structure that we have that maybe worked well for some people at some institutions. But right now, I don't think it's working very well for anybody at any institutions, considering the levels of stress and trauma that students are feeling.
Thank you. That's really, I think, I'll be honest, right? That's a departure from where I am, but I see value in taking that approach because it really doesn't put the onus on the student for things that are legitimately out of their control. But I would predict that maybe there's some, have you gotten any pushback about this from other colleagues? Have you been trying to roll it out? Sort of talk about like when you get kind of out of the one-on-one conversation, or other students, like do other students have this baseline suspicion that there are students trying to, air quotes, get away with things, even though it sounds like you have to convince people to get away with something that will help them?
And, there's the irony. I did talk about it with my introductory class. It's a first year seminar class, and I wanted to be really open about it. And I said, what do you think about this policy? And like, oh, well, people are going to play you. They're going to cheat. And colleagues think that too. Oh, but what if they're tricking you? And, I think I'm willing to be tricked once or twice if that helps somebody who's legitimately in need. It's where are we going to make our error? It's like one of those type 1, type 2 error questions. I would rather err on the side of compassion in this situation in the world today than try to be an error detector. So students and faculty have pushed back on that. I oversee the Psych 1010 course with a colleague. We co-coordinate it. We make a course in a can, so to speak, for our adjuncts who can come in, and they can modify. There are places that they can make room. And we've had some interesting discussions in our online community area where they're saying, should I extend this thing for a student? And I'm always like, yes. And some of them are like, what's wrong? What reasons do you have for extending? Who cares? Let's just extend it. And we had a little bit of a discussion on circle of safety. I said, you don't have to use this, but here's what I'm doing right now. And some of them just were like, whoa, can't do that. And some of them said, wow, that's interesting. I want to try that. And, it is uncomfortable. I've got to admit, this has been an uncomfortable process because I'm not used to having this attitude, but it hasn't hurt anybody. Yeah, I have to extend some deadlines. Yeah, I have to communicate a little bit more via email. But the expressions of gratitude that I've gotten from students, I had no idea how much angst, how much difficulty, what an obstacle to learning my prior late policy was. And so I'm more than willing to be played once or twice if that means someone who really needs help and compassion gets it.
And I don't have the sort of data right at hand, but I just assume that in my classroom, things aren't distributed equally when they walk in, right? So they have different financial means. They're under different, as you mentioned, different levels of family stress. They're under different levels of, personal stuff going on. And I don't think that we necessarily talk about that enough. Well, I won't say we. I don't always talk about that enough, right? I think about the content, but I think this is a really good way to remember the content in the context of the whole person that's sitting in the room. Has it changed at all how students are they more talkative in class too? Because I'm always sort of thinking about other perks besides students being, feeling more heard and understood and cared for, but also that then maybe students that feel that way are more willing to speak up in class and will have more honest discussions, or they're willing to work harder when they have the space. Have you noticed? And again, recognizing this is not a controlled experiment, and you didn't only do this in one section and not the other while controlling things, but have you noticed changes in that way?
Sure. I'm happy to talk about anecdotal experience. I think that, informal observations are great to inform later, more controlled empirical research. So it makes sense that this is a great descriptive starting point. So I want to give a little context about UVU and my class really briefly before I kind of get into your question. So at Utah Valley University, we have a huge proportion of first-gen students, I think, and I could be wrong, so nobody be mad if I'm wrong. I think we're around 40%. We have a large minority population for Utah, not for the rest of the nation, but for Utah. And we're in a really interesting, a very collectivist sort of culture here where family is incredibly important. And people are debt averse, so our students don't want to take student loans or find financial aid. They want to be working the whole time. So we generally have older students married with children, working full time, attempting to go to school full time, and often first gen at the same time. Then in this context, I decided, speaking of, anecdotal experiments here, right? Informal research. I decided I wanted to do an intervention. We have a body of students, about 250 students each year in the fall, who are admitted very late, where they're registering for classes sometimes as late as the third week of class. And so I got permission to hide my class and not let anybody enroll unless they were in this special body of students. So my students tend to be a little bit more at risk because they're in that really late enrolling group. Now, I'm also a first-year seminar, which is a pilot this semester. So it's a bunch of really interesting intersections of groups of people and interventions that we're trying. And so there are about 12 other, maybe 15 other faculty who are doing this pilot of a first-year seminar in their content course. And we had a meeting the other day, and this is where I'm tying it back in. I swear I'm coming to answer that question. And my colleagues were in there, and they're saying, oh my gosh, I can't get my students to come to class because we all are trying to do live stream where we can have a lot of contact, face-to-face time with these students. And so we chose the live stream format. Can't get them to come to class. I can't get them, if they do come to class, I swear they're doing something else. They're not interacting in my class. And so I came back to them and I said, well, I can get all my students to come to class every day. I can't get them to do the work on Canvas. So I have the backwards problem, but I think it's the intersection of here's this circle of safety with compassion. Here are my efforts to build rapport. I've been researching a little bit into how to build rapport in a live stream environment, and our blog actually just posted last night. So that's an interesting thing I can send you if you're interested. But I've got the rapport. They were willing today to say, oh my gosh, I can't take it today. Can we cancel today? And I said, sure. And then I said, what are we going to do? And they said, let's play Among Us. And they structured the class. And they said, divide us into 2 breakout rooms. And these people will go here and we'll go here and we'll play Among Us the rest of the time. And we spent the rest of the time together. And my colleague who did the blog post with me, she also works on building a lot of rapport and having a lot of compassion. She has a very similar circle of safety kind of attitude. And her students tell her, oh my gosh, this feels like a family. Can we get together when COVID is over? Or can we take a moment just to talk with each other so that there's this community of support? And so, yes, I find anecdotally that there does seem to be a difference in our interactions and our level of trust.
Thank you. That is, wow, the idea of people feeling like their class is a family in a space where you said already has kind of a collectivist approach. It's a I can't think of a higher compliment than to
that made her feel really good.
So any other kind of perks or benefits for people that are still feeling, or maybe just if they're just feeling a little bit nervous about relinquishing that kind of level of control over the schedule or when they're going to grade, any kind of words of encouragement? Do you feel like you could do this as a partial approach, that some assignments have a circle of safety around them, but that other things that it's really essential that everyone in class has done don't? Do you think that a hybrid approach might work?
I think so. I'm an all or nothing kind of person. So when I experiment hardcore, but it could be really easy to have, a partial approach to it where you say, oh, well, those, automatically graded quizzes, those things I'm not going to, you could do that anytime in this 2-week period. I'm not going to do anything. And for the written assignments that maybe need more help and support, I will. So yeah, I think there's also a very practical aspect to this. I used to spend a lot of time deciding whether I needed to police someone being late or not. Does this sound fishy or not? Do I need to ask for documentation? Is the documentation okay? Do I need to follow up on that documentation? And that took a lot of time. It took a lot of mental energy. And it was really freeing emotionally, because we do a lot of emotional labor in our courses too, to be able to say, you know what, whatever you say is valid. Let me just help you. It took this whole layer of distrust and effort away, which gave me extra time to grade those late things and to extend those assignments. So there's a trade-off there. But I think what it boils down to is you have to be comfortable with what you're doing. Or at least willing to lean into the discomfort. I chose to lean into the discomfort of this. I have some colleagues who will, other colleagues who won't. And so find your comfort level, adopt some if you want to, adopt all if you want to. That's your choice. That's great. But the benefits of having that trust and compassion with the students, who then, as another perk, like this week has been really hard for me as a human. It is just difficult. And so I was able to say to my students, I need the circle of safety too. I'm running behind. I'm having a hard time. And they're more than willing to let me enter into their circle of safety too.
Well, that's great. And I would say a great note to end on, unless there is something else you would like our listeners to know or think or do or read.
Yeah, actually, I was talking with my junior colleague about this because she is very equitable. She's very inclusive. And sometimes we toss ideas back and forth together. And she referred me to a book called Teaching To Transgress by Bell Hooks. Now, I have the link to it. I haven't read all the way through it, but I've skimmed a little bit. And some of these thoughts have informed what I'm doing with the circle of safety. And I hope that it informs a lot more of what I do too.
Well, that's terrific. And I will also investigate the book as well. And if I really have it together, I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Thank you again so much for your time, Jessica, and take care.
Thank you.